The broken horseshoe hangs from a charred beam swinging gently in the desert wind. Blood darkens the dust beneath it, a promise written in crimson. They say vengeance is a ghost that never rests, and in these borderlands, some ghosts have hands that remember the weight of Colt revolvers. 5 years of silence can't wash away blood spilled in the rain. 5 years of hiding can't erase a name whispered around campfires, the prairie ghost. The shadow that brings death on swift horses. Now the past rides again, as merciless as the New Mexico sun. They came for her mother, these men, with cold eyes and colder hearts. They didn't know what darkness they were summoning. They couldn't see that some widows don't wear black to mourn, they wear it to hunt. In this land where justice comes from the barrel of a gun, old debts will be paid. And when the shooting stops, not even the dead will rest easy. The dawn broke reluctantly over Mesa Roja, spreading tentative fingers of light across the parched land. Emma Hayes watched it from her porch, the coffee in her cup long gone cold. At 45, her face was a map of lines earned the hard way, but her eyes remained sharp, the eyes of someone who had seen too much and forgotten none of it. Her small ranch sat on the outskirts of town, just far enough to keep the world at arm's length. 3 horses grazed in a corral that needed mending. A barn that had seen better days housed her modest workshop, where she mixed horse liniment that she sold at the local market. To the people of Mesa Roja, she was just a widow living a quiet life, selling her remedies and keeping to herself. None of them knew she had once been the prairie ghost. Emma's gaze drifted to the distant hills where the morning light created shadows like bruises on the landscape. 5 years had passed since she'd laid down her guns, but time hadn't dulled the memories. If anything, they'd grown sharper, more insistent, like knives that found new ways to cut. "You coming in for breakfast?" Martha Reynolds called from inside. At 68, Emma's mother remained as sturdy as the land itself. She had run the general store in town for 30 years with unflinching determination, the same determination that had kept her going after Emma's father died. "In a minute," Emma replied, her voice carrying the rasp of someone who spoke only when necessary. The horses nickered softly in their corral, sensing her unease. Animals always knew. That's why she preferred their company to people. Animals didn't pretend. They didn't lie. They didn't betray. Emma finished her cold coffee and went inside, where her mother had eggs sizzling in a cast-iron pan. The small house smelled of wood smoke and coffee, the sense of a simple way, the life Emma had chosen when she walked away from bounty hunting. "You're having those dreams again?" Martha stated without looking up from the stove. It wasn't a question. Emma didn't answer. There was no need. Every few months the dreams would return. Jacob's face, his voice, the last words he'd spoken to her before it all went wrong. "It's been 5 years, Emma," Martha said, setting a plate of eggs in front of her daughter. "Whatever ghosts you're chasing, they won't bring them back." Emma picked at her food. "Yeah, I know." But knowing didn't make it easier. Nothing did. After breakfast, Emma saddled her horse, a speckled gray mare named Silver, and rode into town to deliver a fresh batch of horse liniment to the general store. Mesa Roja was a dusty collection of wooden buildings that had sprung up around the promise of a silver mine that had since played out. Now it was just another struggling border town surviving on cattle, the occasional traveler, and the stubborn will of its residents. Martha's general store sat at the far end of the main street. It wasn't much to look at, but it was the heart of the town. People came for supplies and stayed for Martha's straight talk and occasional kindness. Emma tied Silver to the hitching post and carried her crate of bottles inside. The store was empty except for Mrs. Peterson, who was examining a bolt of calico fabric and pretending not to notice Emma. Most people in town kept their distance from the quiet widow, sensing something hidden beneath her surface. Emma preferred it that way. "Morning, Martha," Emma said, setting the crate on the counter. "Fresh batch." Martha was counting inventory, her pencil scratching across a dog-eared ledger. "Good. The Sanchez Ranch ordered 6 bottles. Their horses have been having joint trouble." Emma nodded and began arranging the bottles on the shelf behind the counter. The routine was familiar, comforting in its mundanity. This was her life now, simple, predictable, safe. Far from the life she'd led with Jacob, tracking outlaws across territories, collecting bounties, and dealing justice with the barrel of a gun. As she worked, the shop's bell jangled, and Sheriff Thomas Reed entered, his weathered face set in its usual expression of benign concern. At 50, Reed had been sheriff of Mesa Roja for 15 years, keeping the peace with a minimum of effort. "Morning, Martha. Emma." He nodded to both women. "Just checking in. Heard there might be trouble coming our way." Martha looked up from her ledger. What kind of trouble? Reed adjusted his belt where his revolver hung polished and rarely used. Group of riders spotted near Carson's Creek. Could be nothing but word as they might be Blackwell's gang. Emma froze, a bottle of liniment suspended in midair. Blackwell, the name hit her like a physical blow. She set the bottle down carefully, trying to keep her hand from shaking. Blackwell, Martha frowned. That name sounds familiar. Victor Blackwell, Reed explained, runs with a nasty crew. They've been working their way through the territory, shaking down businesses for protection money. Burned down half of Cottonwood when folks there wouldn't pay. Emma turned away, busying herself with the bottles to hide her face. Victor Blackwell, Frank's younger brother. The one who'd sworn revenge when Emma had put a bullet in Frank's chest 5 years ago, the same night Jacob died. We don't have much worth taking, Martha said dismissively, and I don't pay criminals to leave me alone. Reed sighed. Just be careful, Martha. These aren't men you want to cross. He nodded to Emma and left the bell jingling behind him. Martha went back to her ledger, but Emma could no longer focus on the task at hand. Victor Blackwell was coming to Mesa Roja. It couldn't be a coincidence. I should stay in town tonight, Emma said, trying to keep her voice casual. Help you close up, Martha waved her off. Nonsense. I've been running this store since before you were born. I can handle myself. Emma wanted to argue, but knew it would only make Martha more stubborn. Her mother had never been one to accept help easily, especially from her daughter. I'll be back tomorrow morning, Emma finally said. Need anything from the ranch? Just yourself in one piece, Martha replied, giving her daughter a look that suggested she knew more than she let on. Emma rode home, her mind churning with unwelcome memories. She'd hoped Victor Blackwell would never find her, that he'd forgotten his vow of revenge. It had been 5 years after all. Long enough for most hates to cool, but some hates burned eternal, she knew, like the one she carried in her own heart. That night the dreams came again, more vivid than they had been in months. Rain pounding on the roof of an abandoned barn, the smell of wet wood and horse. Jacob checking his rifle by lantern light, his face set in concentration. Frank Blackwell's holed up in that cabin across the creek, he said. We go in at dawn. Emma loading her revolver, the weight of it familiar in her hand. We should split up. I'll circle around back. Jacob's eyes concerned in the dim light. No, we stay together. Frank's got at least 3 men with him. Emma nodding, but already planning her own approach. Frank Blackwell had a $500 bounty on his head, dead or alive. They needed that money, and Emma had a reputation to maintain. The prairie ghost never lost her prey, dawn breaking gray and cold. The cabin in sight, Jacob signaling to move forward. Then gunfire erupting from an unexpected direction. Jacob hit going down hard, blood spreading across his shirt. Emma returning fire, catching a glimpse of Frank fleeing toward the trees. The choice, stay with Jacob or pursue Frank. The bounty they desperately needed. The reputation that had to be maintained. The first light of dawn found Emma and Rosa making camp in a secluded arroyo 3 miles east of Agua Verde. They had ridden through the night, taking a circuitous route to avoid being tracked. Now as they tended to their horses and prepared a small fire for coffee, Emma outlined her plan. Blackwell has too many men for a direct confrontation, she explained, sketching a rough map in the dirt. We need to reduce his numbers, draw them out in smaller groups. Rosa nodded, adding sticks to the tiny smokeless fire she'd built. Divide and conquer, but how do we get them to split up? Emma's eyes were cold, calculating. Fear, confusion. We make them believe they're being hunted by more than just 2 women. The ghost in her army, Rosa said with a slight smile. Something like that. Emma poured coffee into 2 tin cups. You said you know explosives. My father taught me, before the mine collapsed on him. Rosa accepted the cup. I can make simple charges from things found in any general store. Nothing fancy but effective. Good, we'll need them. Emma sipped her coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. We also need to identify Blackwell's informant in Mesa Roja. I suspect it's Sheriff Reed, but I can't be certain. Rosa's expression darkened. If it is your sheriff, that complicates things. We can't rely on the law. I never did, Emma replied, even when I was bringing in bounties. They fell silent, each woman lost in her own thoughts as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Emma found herself studying Rosa, the lines etched into her face by grief and hardship, the resolute set of her jaw. In another life under different circumstances, they might have been friends. But Emma hadn't had friends since Jacob died. Only ghosts. "We should get some rest," Emma finally said. "We move at dusk." Rosa nodded and arranged her bedroll in the shade of a boulder. "What about your mother? Will Blackwell's men go after her again?" "They might," Emma admitted, "but they want me more than they want her, and they know I've taken the bait. Still, she should be protected." Emma stared into the distance toward Mesa Roja. "There's someone I trust in town, the doctor's assistant. I left a message asking her to stay with my mother. It's the best I can do for now." Rosa seemed satisfied with this answer and closed her eyes. Soon her breathing deepened into sleep. Emma envied her that ability to find rest even in danger. Her own sleep had been fitful for years, haunted by Jacob's face and Frank Blackwell's dying curse. Emma checked her guns one more time, then leaned back against the arroyo wall hat, pulled low over her eyes. She didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion eventually claimed her, dragging her down into dreams of rain and blood and choices that couldn't be unmade. They rode out at dusk, heading back toward Carson's Creek and the abandoned way station where Blackwell had made his temporary headquarters. Emma's plan was simple but dangerous. Observe the camp, identify patterns, and begin picking off outlaws when they strayed from the group. "Like wolves culling the weak from a herd," Rosa had said when Emma explained the strategy. "Exactly like wolves," Emma had agreed, "except our prey bites back." Now as night settled over the desert, they approached the ridge where Emma had watched the camp the previous day. Leaving their horses concealed, they crawled to the vantage point and observed the way station below. The scene had changed since Emma's last visit. More men had arrived. She counted at least 15 now. They were fortifying the station building barricades, posting sentries, preparing for an attack. "They're expecting us," Rosa whispered. Emma nodded. "Which means our informant in Agua Verde wasted no time spreading the word. So much for the element of surprise." "We never had it," Emma replied. "Blackwell's been hunting me for 5 years. He knew I'd come eventually." They watched as riders came and went from the camp, reporting to Victor Blackwell, who had established himself in what had once been the station's office. Through her field glasses, Emma could see him poring over maps, issuing orders with a calm authority that reminded her of military officers she'd encountered during her bounty hunting days. This was not the impulsive, rage-driven young man who had sworn vengeance over his brother's corpse. This was a tactician, a planner, someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. "Look," Rosa whispered, pointing to a rider approaching from the east, the direction of Mesa Roja. "That could be your informant." Emma trained her field glasses on the newcomer, her breath catching as she recognized the silhouette. Sheriff Thomas Reed riding hard alone. "It's Reed," she confirmed, a cold certainty settling in her stomach. "He's selling information to Blackwell." They watched as Reed was escorted into the station, emerging 20 minutes later with what appeared to be a payment. The sheriff mounted his horse and rode back toward Mesa Roja, unaware he was being observed. "We should follow him," Rosa suggested. "Find out what he's telling Blackwell." Emma considered this but shook her head. "No, Reed's not important right now. He's just a tool. Blackwell is the target." She continued to study the camp, noting the placement of sentries, the schedule of patrols, the locations where men gathered to smoke or play cards. Every operation had weaknesses, no matter how well organized. The trick was finding them. As night deepened, activity in the camp slowed. Fires burned low, and men settled into bedrolls or took up watch positions. Emma spotted what she was looking for, a two-man patrol that circled the perimeter of the camp at regular intervals, passing through a dense patch of mesquite about 200 yards from the main building. "There," she said, pointing. "That's our opening." Rosa followed her gaze. 2 men, walking the same route every hour. Predictable. "And isolated when they reach the mesquite," Emma added. "We can take them quietly and reduce Blackwell's numbers by 2 and gather information." Rosa nodded, but her expression was troubled. "These men, some of them may just be hired guns. Not all deserve to die." Emma's face hardened. "They chose to ride with Blackwell. They attacked my mother, left her for dead." Her hand went to one of her Colts. "They all deserve whatever comes to them." Rosa didn't argue, but something in her eyes suggested she didn't entirely agree. Emma didn't care. She hadn't asked for Rosa's help to be her conscience. She needed her skills, her knowledge of the area, and her steadiness under pressure. Nothing more. They retreated from the ridge and returned to their horses, making a wide circle around the camp until they reached the mesquite thicket Emma had identified. The dense thorny bushes provided excellent cover with clear sight lines to the patrol route. Setting up their ambush, Emma checked her pocket watch. Next patrol should pass in about 15 minutes if they keep to schedule. Rosa nodded and began preparing a small medical kit she carried. If we're going to question them, we'll need one of alive and able to talk. I know how to question a man without killing him, Emma replied more sharply than she intended. Rosa met her gaze evenly. I know you do, Ghost, but anger makes the hand heavy on the trigger, and you have plenty of reason to be angry. Emma couldn't argue with that assessment. The rage that had driven her to take up her guns again simmered just below the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. It had been the same when she hunted Frank Blackwell. That burning need for vengeance that had clouded her judgment led her to leave Jacob dying in the rain while she pursued her quarry. She would not make the same mistake again. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about protection, her mother's safety, the townsfolk of Mesa Roja who would suffer under Blackwell's predations. Justice, not just vengeance. At least that's what Emma told herself as they waited in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the desert and the distant murmur of voices from the camp. 14 minutes later, they heard the approaching patrol, two men walking their horses, talking in low voices, rifles resting casually across their saddles. They were relaxed, complacent, clearly not expecting trouble so close to their stronghold. Emma caught Rosa's eye and nodded. They had discussed the plan. Emma would take the man on the left, Rosa the one on the right. Quick, silent, no gunshots to alert the camp. As the patrol entered the mesquite thicket, Emma stepped out behind the man on the left, pressing her Colt against the base of his skull. Don't move. Don't speak, or you die here. Simultaneously, Rosa emerged from cover on the right, a knife at the second man's throat. Both outlaws froze, caught completely by surprise. Emma disarmed her target efficiently, removing his rifle and revolver. Dismount. Slowly, she ordered. Hands where I can see them. The outlaw complied, his movements careful. He was young, no more than 25, with a scraggly beard and nervous eyes. Look, we don't want trouble. Shut up, Emma cut him off. You found trouble when you joined Blackwell. Rosa had her man on the ground, hands tied behind his back. She worked quickly, efficiently, with none of the hesitation Emma might have expected from a former nurse. This woman had clearly seen her share of violence. Emma forced her captive to his knees beside his companion. Now we're going to have a conversation. You're going to tell me everything I want to know about Victor Blackwell's operation, his plans, his men, everything. The younger outlaw glanced at his companion, an older, harder-looking man with a scar across his nose. The older man spat on the ground. We ain't telling you nothing, bitch. Emma's expression didn't change as she drew her second Colt and pressed it against the man's knee. Wrong answer, the older outlaw sneered. Go ahead. I've been shot before. Not by me, Emma replied coldly. She pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening in the quiet night, the bullet shattering the man's kneecap. Emma clamped her hand over his mouth to muffle his scream, her grip like iron as he thrashed in agony. The younger outlaw's eyes widened in terror. Jesus Christ, Emma turned to him. Both guns now drawn. Your friend made his choice. What's yours? Rosa had already gagged the wounded man who was writhing on the ground, blood pooling beneath his ruined knee. She looked at Emma, her expression unreadable. I'll tell you whatever you want to know, the young outlaw stammered. Just don't shoot me, please. Smart boy, Emma said. Let's start with Victor Blackwell. What's he planning for Mesa Roja? It's not just Mesa Roja, the young man said, words tumbling out in his fear. He's planning something bigger, using the town as a base. For what? A raid on the territorial bank in Santa Fe. There's a gold shipment coming through next week. Blackwell's have been planning it 4 months. Emma frowned. This didn't make sense. If he's planning a bank job in Santa Fe, why come to Mesa Roja? Why attack my mother? The outlaw looked confused. Your mother, I don't know nothing about that. We were told to rough up some shop owners for protection money, that's all. The general store, Martha Reynolds, an old woman who was beaten and left for dead. Recognition dawned in the outlaw's eyes. That wasn't supposed to happen. Blackwell just wanted us to scare her, maybe break some things. But Casey and Denton, they got carried away. Blackwell was furious when he found out. Emma's grip tightened on her gun. Furious because they hurt an old woman, or furious because they nearly killed her before he could use her as bait? I don't know what you're talking about, the outlaw insisted. Blackwell never mentioned using anyone as bait. Rosa and Emma exchanged glances. Either the young outlaw was an exceptionally good liar, or he genuinely didn't know about Blackwell's vendetta against the prairie ghost. What about Sheriff Reed? Emma demanded. What's his role in all this? Reed's been feeding Blackwell information about the town who has money, who would fight back, who's vulnerable, in exchange for a cut and looking the other way when we pass through. And the broken horseshoes, the ones left at my mother's store. Again, confusion crossed the outlaw's face. Broken horseshoes, I don't know anything about that. Blackwell keeps a broken horseshoe, carries it with him all the time, but I never seen him leave them anywhere. Emma's certainty wavered. If Blackwell wasn't targeting her specifically, then who had left the broken horseshoes at Martha's store? Who knew about her past as the Prairie Ghost? One more question, she said. Does the name the Prairie Ghost mean anything to you? The outlaw shook his head. Never heard of it. Emma studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but found none. She turned to Rosa, who gave a slight shrug. Either Blackwell was keeping his true motives secret from his men, or there was more to this situation than Emma had initially believed. What do we do with them? Rosa asked, nodding toward the two outlaws. Emma considered their options. Killing them would be the safest course, ensure they couldn't report back to Blackwell. But if they didn't return from patrol, it would raise an alarm. We need to make it look like an accident, she decided, something that wouldn't immediately be connected to us. Rosa nodded and began rummaging in her saddlebag, withdrawing a small leather pouch. I have an idea. She opened the pouch, revealing a fine powder, extracted from certain desert plants. It causes confusion hallucinations. If we dose them both, they'll wander away from their patrol route, maybe get lost in the desert. By the time they're found, if they're found, they won't remember us clearly. Emma nodded, impressed despite herself. Do it. Rosa worked quickly, forcing the older outlaw to swallow some of the powder mixed with water, then doing the same with the younger man, who was too terrified to resist. How long until it takes effect? Emma asked. Not long, 10 minutes, maybe less. Rosa began untying the younger outlaw. We should go. They'll start behaving strangely soon. They gathered their supplies and mounted their horses, leaving the two outlaws sitting in the mesquite thicket, already beginning to show signs of disorientation. The older man was still bleeding from his shattered knee, but the wound wasn't immediately life-threatening. Emma and Rosa rode into the night, putting distance between themselves and the camp, before stopping to discuss what they had learned. Something doesn't add up, Emma said, dismounting near a small outcropping of rocks that provided some shelter. If Blackwell isn't specifically targeting me, then who left those horseshoes at my mother's store? Rosa shook her head. Perhaps the young one didn't know. Perhaps only Blackwell's inner circle is aware of his true motives. Maybe. Emma paced, thinking. But what if it's not Blackwell at all? What if someone else is using his presence as cover to draw me out? Who would do that? Who else knows you were the Prairie Ghost? Emma's mind raced through possibilities. Not many. Jacob, of course, but he's dead. A few lawmen we worked with over the years. Some of the bounties we brought in who lived to see prison. She paused. And Sheriff Reed? Rosa's eyes narrowed. You think Reed is orchestrating this, playing both sides? It's possible. He knew me and Jacob, knew our reputation, and he's clearly working with Blackwell now. But why would he want to expose you? Emma had no answer for that. Reed had never shown any animosity toward her or Jacob during their bounty hunting days. If anything, he had seemed grateful for their help in cleaning up his jurisdiction without requiring much of his own involvement. I don't know, she admitted, but I intend to find out. She checked her pocket watch. It's nearly midnight. We should head back to Mesa Roja, check on my mother, and see what else we can learn. Rosa agreed, and they mounted up, taking a circuitous route to avoid Blackwell's camp and any potential patrols. The night was clear, stars sprinkled across the black sky like diamonds on velvet, the moon providing just enough light to navigate by. Emma found her thoughts drifting to Jacob as they rode. What would he make of all this? He had always been the cautious one, the planner, while Emma had relied on instinct and quick reflexes. Now she was trying to think several moves ahead, anticipating threats, analyzing motives, being more like Jacob than herself. Tell me about him. Rosa said, suddenly breaking the silence. About who? Your husband, the man you lost. Emma stiffened. She never spoke of Jacob, not even to Martha. The wound was still too raw even after 5 years. There's nothing to tell, she said curtly. He's dead. Rosa was quiet for a moment, then said, My son Miguel, he wanted to be a doctor. Was saving money for school. That's why he took the job at the ranch where Blackwell's men killed him. Her voice caught. I never talk about him. It hurts too much. But sometimes I think the hurt is all I have left of him. And if I don't share it, if I keep it locked away, he disappears a little more each day. The words struck Emma like a physical blow. She had locked away her memories of Jacob for 5 years, treating them like something dangerous, something that could destroy her if she let them out. But what if Rosa was right? What if by trying to bury the pain she was burying Jacob too? Emma began, then stopped, the words sticking in her throat. She tried again. Jacob was the best man I ever knew. Honest, decent. He should never have married someone like me. Someone like you. A killer, Emma said flatly. That's what I was, what I am. Jacob brought fugitives in alive whenever he could. Believed in the law and justice. I believed in efficiency. Getting the job done. Rosa didn't reply, letting Emma continue at her own pace. We met when we were both after the same bounty, Hector Vega, a rustler with a $500 price on his head. I got to Vega first, but Jacob arrived as I was bringing him in. We argued over who had the rightful claim. A ghost of a smile crossed Emma's face at the memory. Jacob suggested we split the bounty. I suggested he go to hell. But you ended up together. We kept running into each other after that, competing for the same bounties, then working together when the targets were too dangerous to handle alone. Somewhere along the way, Emma trailed off, remembering the first time Jacob had kissed her after they'd survived a shootout with the Dawson gang. Somewhere along the way, I fell in love with him. Never thought it would happen to someone like me. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hooves on hard-packed earth the only noise. Jacob wouldn't want you to blame yourself for his death, Rosa finally said. Emma's jaw tightened. You didn't know him. I know grief, Rosa replied. I know guilt. Neither brings back the dead, and neither honors their memory. Before Emma could respond, they crested a small rise and saw Mesa Roja in the distance, a cluster of faint lights against the darkness. Dawn was still hours away, but a few windows glowed with lamplight, the saloon most likely, and perhaps the doctor's office where Martha was recovering. As they approached the town, Emma slowed, a sense of unease creeping over her. Something's wrong. Rosa followed her gaze. What do you see? Too many lights, too much movement for this time of night. They dismounted and approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. As they reached the outskirts of town, Emma's worst fears were confirmed. Riders moved through the streets, men with guns checking buildings. Blackwell's men, they had come to Mesa Roja. They're looking for something, Rosa whispered. Or someone. Emma's blood ran cold. My mother. She turned to Rosa. We need to get to the doctor's office. Now. They left their horses tied at the edge of town and moved through backyards and alleys, avoiding the main streets where Blackwell's men patrolled. Emma led the way, her knowledge of Mesa Roja allowing her to navigate unseen. As they neared the doctor's office, Emma spotted two riders out front. Her hand went to her gun, but Rosa caught her arm. Wait, she whispered. Look. Mama looked more carefully and recognized one of the men, Sheriff Reed, talking to someone she didn't know. They weren't acting like part of the search party. They were having what appeared to be a heated argument. Emma and Rosa crept closer, finding cover behind a water trough where they could overhear the conversation. Not what we agreed, Reed was saying, his voice angry but hushed. Blackwell promised no one would get hurt. Plans change, the other man replied, a hard-faced individual with a lieutenant's air about him. The boss wants the old woman, says she knows something about the ghost. Reed ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. This is going too far, Denton. I agreed to look the other way for the protection racket take a cut. I didn't sign up for kidnapping and murder. Too late for cold feet, Sheriff, Denton sneered. You're in it now. Either help us find the old woman, or you'll join her when we do. Reed's hand drifted toward his gun. You threatening me, Denton? Just stating facts. Denton seemed unconcerned by Reed's posture. Blackwell doesn't tolerate loose ends, and right now you're looking mighty loose. The tension between the two men was palpable, but after a moment, Reed's shoulders slumped. Fine, but I want it on record I didn't agree to this. Denton laughed. Sure, Sheriff. I'll be sure to tell Blackwell you were real broken up about it. He gestured to the doctor's office. Now, is she in there or not? Reed nodded reluctantly. Far as I know. Doc Wilson's been keeping her under observation. Good, get her out quietly. We don't need the whole town waking up. Emma's hand tightened on her gun. They were planning to take Martha, use her as leverage against the prairie ghost. She couldn't let that happen. She turned to Rosa, speaking in the barest whisper. I'm going to create a diversion. When I do get into the doctor's office and get my mother out, take her to my ranch, she knows the way. Rosa nodded, but her eyes were concerned. What kind of diversion? Emma didn't answer, already slipping away into the shadows. She circled around to the livery stable across the street where several horses belonging to Blackwell's men were tied. Moving silently, she freed all but one of the horses, then fired a shot into the air. The effect was immediate. The horses bolted, startled by the gunshot, creating chaos in the street. Men shouted, running to catch their mounts. Reed and Denton both turned toward the commotion, drawing their weapons. Emma mounted the remaining horse and rode straight at them, firing her Colts with deadly accuracy. Denton went down with a bullet in his chest, dead before he hit the ground. Reed dove for cover, returning fire, but missing in his haste. The street erupted into a firefight as Blackwell's men realized they were under attack. Emma rode hard, drawing their fire away from the doctor's office, giving Rosa the opportunity to reach Martha. Bullets whined past Emma's head as she galloped through town, shooting back over her shoulder. She had no illusions about escaping, there were too many of them, but she only needed to buy Rosa enough time to get Martha to safety. As she reached the edge of town, Emma felt a sharp impact in her left side, a bullet finding its mark. The pain was immediate and intense, but she stayed on the horse, pushing it harder. Behind her, she could hear hoofbeats as Blackwell's men gave chase. Emma rode into the desert, blood soaking her shirt, pain making each breath a struggle. She had miles to go before reaching the arroyo where she and Rosa had camped earlier. Miles of open terrain where she would be an easy target once the sun rose. But as the lights of Mesa Roja faded behind her, Emma allowed herself a grim smile. She had drawn Blackwell's men away from the town, away from Martha. If Rosa had succeeded in getting her mother out of the doctor's office, then the night's work was worth whatever came next. Emma pressed a hand to her wounded side, feeling the warm wetness of blood seeping between her fingers. The bullet had gone through, which was both good and bad. No need to dig it out, but more blood loss to contend with. She rode on the desert night, enveloping her stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, the same stars that had guided her on countless hunts, that had witnessed Jacob's death, that would watch over whatever came next in this deadly game. The prairie ghost was wounded but far from finished, and Victor Blackwell would soon learn what it truly meant to be hunted by a ghost. The abandoned way station at Carson's Creek hummed with activity as the sun rose. Victor Blackwell stood on the porch watching as his men prepared for the day's operations. The failed raid on Mesa Roja had cost him 3 men, including Denton, one of his most trusted lieutenants, and yielded neither the prairie ghost nor the old woman who allegedly knew her whereabouts. It was a setback, but Victor had faced worse in his climb to power. Patience and planning had brought him this far. They would see him through to his goal. Sheriff Reed rode into camp, his face haggard from a night without sleep. Victor watched him dismount and approached, noting the man's nervous demeanor. Reed had been a useful tool, but tools could be discarded when they lost their edge. Sheriff, Victor greeted him coldly. I understand last night didn't go as planned. Reed wiped dust from his face. You could say that. Your men tore up my town, spooked half the population, and got 3 of your own killed. For nothing. Not for nothing, Victor replied. We've flushed the ghost into the open. She's wounded on the run. It's only a matter of time now. This has gone too far, Blackwell, Reed said, a note of desperation in his voice. I didn't sign on for this kind of bloodshed. The deal was you'd run your protection racket, I'd get my cut, and nobody would get seriously hurt. Victor regarded the sheriff with cold amusement. Plans change, Sheriff. They have a way of evolving. Not this one. Reed's hand moved toward his gun. I'm out. Find yourself another lawman to bribe. In one fluid motion, Victor drew his revolver and shot Reed through the heart. The sheriff's eyes widened in surprise as he fell backward into the dirt, dead before he could draw his own weapon. The men in the camp barely looked up from their tasks. Violence was the language they spoke, and Victor Blackwell was especially fluent. "Bury him," Victor ordered a nearby man. "Somewhere the coyotes won't dig him up too quickly." As his order was carried out, Victor walked to the way station's office where maps of the territory were spread across a table. He studied them, calculating distances, terrain features, possible routes. The ghost was wounded, which meant she wouldn't get far. She would need shelter, medical attention. She would need allies. Victor's finger traced a path from Mesa Roja to Agua Verde. The Mexican settlement was the most likely haven for a fugitive in this area, and it was where one of his men had spotted the ghost, talking to a local woman, a nurse, if reports were accurate. "Santiago," Victor called to a lean Mexican who served as his scout. "Take 4 men and ride to Agua Verde. Find a woman, a nurse, or healer. The ghost may seek her out for treatment." Santiago nodded and left to carry out the order. Victor returned to his maps, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The hunt was nearing its conclusion. Soon he would have his revenge for Frank's death, a debt 5 years in the making. But as Victor plotted his next move, a nagging doubt crept into his mind. The ghost had proven resourceful, even wounded. And there was still the matter of the old woman, Martha Reynolds, who had escaped during the chaos in Mesa Roja. What was her connection to all this? What did she know? Victor had left the broken horseshoes at her store on a hunch based on rumors that someone in Mesa Roja had connections to the prairie ghost. He hadn't expected such an immediate and violent response. Clearly, the old woman was more than just a shopkeeper. She was important to the ghost, important enough to risk everything. As the day wore on, reports came in from scouts and patrols. No sign of the ghost, though. Blood trails indicated she had headed east from Mesa Roja before disappearing into rocky terrain where tracking was impossible. Victor was considering his options when a rider arrived from the south, one of the men he'd sent to follow the supply wagon that regularly traveled between Mesa Roja and Fort Stanton to the east. "Found something interesting, boss," the man reported. "Papers in the wagon master's strongbox. Letters between Martha Reynolds and someone named Emma Hayes." Emma Hayes. Victor repeated the name, unfamiliar. What did the letter say? Mostly personal stuff, but one mentioned Hayes having to stay hidden because of what happened with the Blackwells. Victor's interest sharpened. Hayes could be a married name. The ghost might have wed after Frank's death. "There's more," the writer continued. "The wagon master had records showing regular deliveries to a small ranch outside Mesa Roja, owned by Emma Hayes." A slow smile spread across Victor's scarred face. "Well now, it seems we've found our ghost nest." He turned to his men. "Saddle up. We're paying Mrs. Hayes a visit." As his men prepared to ride, Victor took the broken horseshoe from his pocket, his talisman, his reminder of blood oaths made long ago. Soon he would fulfill his promise to Frank. Soon the prairie ghost would be nothing more than a memory washed away by blood and fire. Little did he know that as he planned his advance, Emma Hayes was making a devastating discovery of her own one that would change everything she thought she knew about the past and about the truth behind Jacob's death. "Go!" Jacob gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "Get him. I'll be fine." Emma hesitating, torn between duty and love, then making her choice, running after Frank, leaving Jacob bleeding on the wet ground, catching Frank at the edge of the woods. A shootout, Frank taking a bullet to the chest, Emma returning victorious, the bounty secured, only to find Jacob cold and still, eyes open to the rain. Emma woke with a gasp, sweat soaking her nightgown despite the cool night air. The dream was always the same, yet somehow worse each time. Because it wasn't just a dream, it was memory twisted by guilt into something that haunted her waking hours as well as her sleep. She'd chosen the bounty over Jacob, chosen her reputation as the prairie ghost over the man she loved. And she'd been paying for that choice ever since. Emma lit a lamp and moved to the small trunk at the foot of her bed. The key hung around her neck, never removed. Inside lay the remnants of her former life, the twin Colt revolvers polished and oiled despite 5 years of disuse, the leather gun belt still supple, a stack of wanted posters yellow with age, and a small leather pouch containing Jacob's pocket watch and wedding ring. She lifted one of the revolvers, feeling its weight. For a decade, these guns had been extensions of her hands, instruments of justice and death. Now they were just reminders of all she had lost. Emma replaced the gun and locked the trunk. She wouldn't be the prairie ghost again. She had promised Jacob's memory that much. But with Victor Blackwell coming to Mesa Roja, she needed to be prepared for whatever came next. The next morning, Emma rose before dawn and rode to town, an uneasiness driving her forward. The streets were empty, the buildings dark shapes against the lightening sky. She tied Silver outside the general store and frowned at the darkened windows. Martha was always up by now, lamps lit as she prepared to open. Emma knocked on the door. "Ma, it's me." No answer. She tried the handle. Locked. Using the spare key Martha kept hidden under a loose board, Emma unlocked the door and stepped inside. "Ma." The store was silent and dark. Emma struck a match and lit the nearest lamp, casting long shadows across the familiar space. Nothing seemed out of place until she moved toward the back room. The door was ajar, and in the lamplight, Emma could see signs of a struggle. A chair overturned, items swept from a shelf. Her heart hammering, she pushed the door fully open. Blood spattered the floor in dark drops leading toward the back door. But no Martha. Emma set the lamp down with shaking hands and examined the room more carefully. A piece of paper lay on the floor, partially hidden under the desk. She picked it up and recognized her mother's handwriting, scrawled hastily. "Emma, they came for protection money. I refused. They..." The note ended abruptly. Emma's blood ran cold. She searched the rest of the store, finding more signs of violence, but no Martha. When she returned to the back room, something caught her eye that she'd missed before, a small object nailed to the desk. A broken horseshoe. Emma stared at it, her breath catching. It wasn't just any horseshoe. It was the symbol of Frank Blackwell's gang, a broken horseshoe signifying bad luck for their enemies. Victor was using his brother's old calling card. This wasn't about protection money. This was about drawing out the prairie ghost. Emma rushed outside and saw the first townspeople beginning to stir. She grabbed the nearest person, a young man opening the barbershop. "The doctor's office, where is it?" she demanded. Startled, he pointed down the street. "2 blocks that way, but Doc Wilson won't be in until..." Emma was already running, praying her instincts were right. If they'd hurt Martha but wanted to use her as bait, they wouldn't take her far. The doctor's office was a small, clapboard building with a sign announcing H. Wilson, physician and surgeon. Emma burst through the door to find a startled young woman in a nurse's uniform. "My mother, Martha Reynolds, is she here?" The nurse's expression shifted from surprise to concern. "She was brought in late last night. Sheriff Reed found her on the road outside town." "Where is she?" "This way." The nurse led Emma to a small room at the back of the building. "She's been asking for you." Martha lay on a narrow bed, her face a mass of bruises, one arm bandaged and splinted. She looked small and frail. Nothing like the indomitable woman who had raised Emma alone. Alone after her father died. "Ma," Emma whispered, kneeling beside the bed. Martha's eyes fluttered open. "Emma, I told those bastards. I don't pay criminals." Emma took her mother's uninjured hand, fighting back tears. "Who did this?" "Men asking for protection money. Their leader, cold eyes, didn't give a name." Martha's voice was weak, her breathing labored. "They burned the store, Emma, after they finished with me." Emma's grip tightened. "The store doesn't matter. You're what matters." Martha's eyes focused suddenly with unexpected clarity. "They left something for you, said the ghost would understand." Emma's blood turned to ice. They knew. Somehow Victor Blackwell had tracked her to Mesa Roja. He knew who she was, who she had been. "Rest now," Emma said, gently stroking her mother's gray hair. "You're safe." Martha's eyes drifted closed. The nurse appeared at Emma's side. "Your mother has 3 broken ribs, a broken arm, and a concussion. She needs rest, but she should recover." Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Rage burned inside her, a familiar feeling she thought she'd left behind 5 years ago. She stood and looked at the nurse. "Who brought her in?" "Sheriff Reed. Said he found her on his evening rounds." Emma frowned. Reed had known about the Blackwell gang coming. Had he failed to protect the town, or was there something more sinister at play? "Thank you for caring for her," Emma said. "I'll be back later." She left the doctor's office and headed straight for the sheriff's office. Reed was at his desk, paperwork spread before him. He looked up as Emma entered, his expression guarded. "Emma, I was about to send someone for you." "About Martha." "What happened?" Emma cut him off. Reed sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Found her on the road last night, beat all to hell. Must have dragged herself quite a ways from the store." And the store? Burned, not much left. I'm sorry, Emma. Emma studied the sheriff's face, looking for signs of deception. Reed had been sheriff when she and Jacob were still bounty hunters. He'd known them professionally, if not well. Did he also know who she had been? Had he told the Blackwell gang? You warned us about Blackwell's men yesterday, Emma said carefully. Did you know they were planning to target my mother's store? Reed shook his head. I knew they were in the area. Didn't know who they'd hit first. And you didn't think to post a deputy or check on the store yourself earlier. Reed's expression hardened. I've got 3 deputies and 20 businesses in this town, Emma. We can't be everywhere. Emma knew he was right, but suspicion had kept her alive during her years as a bounty hunter. And right now, every instinct she had was screaming that something wasn't right. Did they leave anything at the store? A sign or a message? Reed frowned. Not that I saw. Why, Imao didn't answer. Either Reed hadn't seen the broken horseshoe or he was lying. Neither option sat well with her. I'll be staying with my mother at the doctor's, she said. If you learn anything about who did this, I want to know. Reed nodded. Of course, and Emma, I truly am sorry about Martha. She's a good woman. Emma left without responding. Back on the street, she mounted Silver and rode to what remained of her mother's store. The building was a blackened skeleton, still smoldering in places. A small crowd of townspeople had gathered watching the ruins with the morbid fascination that disasters always attracted. Emma dismounted and approached the charred structure cautiously. The heat still radiated from the ruins, making it impossible to get close. But she didn't need to. From where she stood, she could see multiple broken horseshoes nailed to the few supporting beams that remained standing. This wasn't just a message. It was a declaration of war. Emma returned to Silver and rode out of town toward her ranch. Her mind was clear now, clearer than it had been in 5 years. Victor Blackwell had come for her using her mother as bait. He wanted the prairie ghost, not knowing she had died the same day as Jacob in that rainy clearing where Emma had made her fatal choice. But if it was the prairie ghost he wanted, then it was the prairie ghost he would get. At the ranch, Emma unlocked the trunk at the foot of her bed and removed the twin Colt revolvers. They felt both foreign and familiar in her hands, like meeting an old friend who had changed in your absence. She checked each gun meticulously, muscle memory guiding her fingers. They were still in perfect condition. She had maintained them all these years, even as they lay unused. Next came the gun belt, the leather soft and worn in all the right places. She buckled it around her waist, adjusting it to sit comfortably. Her body had changed in 5 years, softer in some places, harder in others, but the belt still felt like it belonged there. Emma stood before the small mirror hanging on her bedroom wall. The woman who stared back was not the quiet widow who made horse liniment. This woman had eyes that calculated distances and angles, hands that remembered the weight of death, and a stance that spoke of readiness for whatever came. The prairie ghost had returned, but she would need help. The Blackwell gang was too numerous to take on alone, and Emma had been out of the game for 5 years. She needed information, resources, and possibly allies, though the latter would be hard to come by. Most of her old contacts were likely dead in prison or would want nothing to do with her. Emma packed a small bag with essentials, then went to a loose floorboard beneath her bed. Prying it up, she removed a small metal box containing her emergency funds, nearly $1,000 saved from bounties collected during her career. It would have to be enough. Before leaving, she wrote a note to be delivered to the doctor's office. Ma, I've gone to take care of some business. Don't worry. I'll be back soon. Stay with Doc Wilson until I return. Love, Emma. She saddled Silver and a pack horse, loading them with supplies for what might be an extended journey. As she worked, Emma found her mind returning to the broken horseshoe symbol. It was more than just Frank Blackwell's gang sign. It had meaning, a personal meaning to the brothers. Emma remembered Jacob telling her the story once. The Blackwell brothers had grown up on a failing ranch in Texas. Their father, a violent drunk, had beaten their mother to death with a horseshoe when the boys were young. Frank had killed their father in revenge using the same horseshoe. Afterward, he'd broken it in two, one half for him, one for Victor, a symbol of their broken family and the violence that had forged them. The fact that Victor was using this symbol so prominently meant this wasn't just business. This was deeply personal. He wasn't just coming after the prairie ghost. He was coming after Emma Hayes, the woman who had killed his brother. As Emma mounted Silver, her mind drifted to the last time she'd seen Frank Blackwell. Rain pouring down, Frank clutching his bleeding chest, looking up at her with hatred in his eyes. "Victor will come for you, he'd gasped. "He'll find you and he'll make you pay for both of us." Emma had dismissed it as the empty threat of a dying man, a mistake that might cost her mother's life and her own. She urged Silver forward, heading south. If Victor Blackwell wanted to dig up ghosts from the past, he'd soon find one standing right in front of him, a ghost with 2 Colt revolvers and a score to settle. Emma rode hard for Carson's Creek, where Sheriff Reed had said the Blackwell gang had been spotted. The creek was little more than a seasonal Western Inn, dry most of the year, but transformed into a rushing torrent during the brief rainy season. Now in late autumn, it was a dusty gully cutting through the landscape. Near the creek stood an abandoned way station, once a stop for the stagecoach line, that had since been replaced by the railroad 20 miles to the east. It was the kind of place Outlaws favored, remote with good visibility of the surrounding terrain and multiple escape routes. Emma approached cautiously, leaving her horses hidden in a stand of scrubby trees a half-mile away. On foot, she made her way to a ridge overlooking the station, stretching out on her stomach to observe through a pair of field glasses she'd packed. The station showed signs of recent occupation, horses in the corral, smoke from the chimney, men moving about. Emma counted at least 8 individuals, all armed, but she didn't see Victor Blackwell among them, assuming she'd even recognize him after all these years. As she watched a rider approach from the east, the men at the station greeting him with obvious deference. The newcomer dismounted, and even from a distance, Emma could tell this was someone of importance. He carried himself with authority, his gestures commanding attention. Emma adjusted the field glasses, trying to get a better look at the man's face. He turned and she caught her breath. The years had changed him, but she recognized Victor Blackwell immediately. The same sharp features as his brother, the same cold eyes. He'd grown a beard since she'd last seen him, and a scar now ran from his left temple to his jaw, but it was unmistakably him. Victor Blackwell had grown from the angry young man she remembered into something more dangerous. A leader of men, a planner, a man with patience. That made him far more threatening than his impulsive older brother had ever been. Emma watched as Victor issued orders, the men around him nodding and dispersing to various tasks. Whatever he was planning, it was organized and deliberate. Not the random violence of common outlaws, but something calculated. She needed to know more. Carefully backing away from the ridge, Emma returned to her horses and rode a wide circle around the way station, heading toward a small Mexican settlement called Agua Verde that lay a few miles to the south. It was the kind of place where questions could be asked and information bought if one knew how to do both discreetly. Agua Verde consisted of a cluster of adobe buildings surrounding a small spring that gave the settlement its name. Emma had visited it several times during her bounty hunting days, tracking fugitives who sought refuge in its anonymous streets. Now she hoped it would yield information about Victor Blackwell's plans. She rode into town as dusk was falling, the air cooling rapidly as it always did in the desert. Few people were on the streets, but eyes watched from darkened windows as she passed. A stranger was always noticed in a place like Agua Verde, especially a woman riding alone. Emma headed for the cantina at the center of town, a place she remembered as a hub of information. Tying Silver to the hitching post, she adjusted her gun belt and pushed through the swinging doors. The cantina was dimly lit and smoky, occupied by a dozen or so patrons who fell silent as Emma entered. She walked to the bar, ignoring the stares, and ordered a whiskey in fluent Spanish. The bartender, a heavy-set man with a scar across his throat, served her without comment. Emma sipped the cheap liquor and surveyed the room through the mirror behind the bar. Most of the patrons had returned to their drinks and conversations, but a few continued to watch her with undisguised interest. One in particular caught her attention, a woman in her 50s, sitting alone in a corner, her dark eyes assessing Emma with unusual intensity. After a moment, Emma took her drink and approached the woman's table. "Mind if I join you?" The woman gestured to the empty chair across from her. "It's a free country, or so they say." Emma sat and studied the woman more closely. She had the weathered face of someone who had lived a hard life, but carried herself with dignity. A thin scar ran along her jawline, visible despite her attempts to hide it, with a worn rebozo draped around her shoulders. "I'm looking for information," Emma said, keeping her voice low. "About Victor Blackwell." The woman's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Information costs money. And mentioning that name could cost more than money." Emma placed a gold eagle on the table. "I'm willing to pay." The woman glanced at the coin but didn't touch it. What do you want to know? What's he planning? Why is he in this territory? The woman took a sip of her drink, considering Emma over the rim of her glass. They say he's looking for someone. A bounty hunter who killed his brother. A woman. Emma kept her face impassive. What would he want with a bounty hunter? Revenge. The woman's gaze was penetrating. They say this bounty hunter, was called the Prairie Ghost, that she could track a man through a sandstorm and never lost her prey, until she disappeared 5 years ago. Emma tried to hide her surprise. Her reputation had apparently grown in her absence. And Blackwell thinks this ghost is in the territory. The woman leaned forward. He doesn't think. He knows, just like I know who I'm talking to right now. Ghost. Emma's hand moved instinctively toward her gun, but the woman raised her palms in a gesture of peace. I mean you no harm. My name is Rosa Delgado. You don't remember me, but we've met before. 7 years ago, my husband was killed by the Cortez brothers. They took over our ranch, kept me as property. She touched the scar on her jaw. You tracked them down, brought them in, dead. Emma remembered now. The Cortez brothers, 3 men who had terrorized ranches along the border, killing the men and taking the women. She had found them holed up in an abandoned mine shaft and delivered justice with lead. You saved me, Ghost, Rosa continued. I've never forgotten, and now I can repay the debt. Blackwell is dangerous, more dangerous than his brother ever was. He has 20 men all loyal to him. And he's made a deal with someone in Mesa Roja. What kind of deal? I don't know. But he meets with someone from your town and a man. Older. They talk, and afterward Blackwell knows things he shouldn't know. Sheriff Reed. It was possible. Reed had seemed too unconcerned about the Blackwell gang, too unsurprised by the attack on Martha. There's more, Rosa said, her voice dropping even lower. Blackwell's men attacked an old woman in Mesa Roja, left her for dead. I know, Emma said, her voice tight. She's my mother. Rosa's eyes widened slightly. Then it's true what they're saying, that Blackwell is using her to draw you out. It worked, Emma said grimly. Rosa nodded, understanding. You need help. You can't face 20 men alone, even if you are the Prairie Ghost. I don't work with others, not anymore. You don't have a choice. Rosa's tone was matter-of-fact. I can help you. I know explosives. My father was a miner. And I know healing herbs medicines. I've been a nurse since you saved me. Emma considered the offer. She had planned to gather information, maybe eliminate a few of Blackwell's men to weaken his position, but Rosa was right. Alone, she stood little chance against a gang that size. Why would you risk your life for me? Emma asked. Rosa touched her scar again. You gave me back my life, and... She hesitated. Blackwell's men killed my son 3 months ago. He was just 16, working at a ranch near the border. They said he was a thief. He wasn't. The grief in the woman's eyes was familiar to Emma, the same grief she saw in her own reflection. The grief of someone who had lost everything that mattered. I'm sorry about your son, Emma said softly. Rosa's face hardened. Don't be sorry. Help me make them pay. Emma considered her options. Working with someone else went against every instinct she'd developed as the Prairie Ghost. She had always operated alone, even when married to Jacob, but times had changed. She was older, 5 years removed from the life, and Victor Blackwell wasn't some common outlaw who could be taken down with a well-placed shot. All right, she finally said. We work together, but we do it my way. Rosa nodded. Your way? What's the plan? First, we need to know more about Blackwell's operation, who he's working with in Mesa Roja, what he's planning next. And then, Emma's eyes grew cold. And then we start hunting. As they talked, neither woman noticed the man who slipped out of the cantina and mounted a horse tied outside. He rode hard for Carson's Creek, dust billowing behind him in the gathering darkness. Word was spreading. The Prairie Ghost had returned. In the abandoned way station at Carson's Creek, Victor Blackwell received the news with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He stood by the fireplace, the flames casting his scarred face in sinister relief. So she's finally surfaced, he said to the messenger. The ghost herself. She was asking questions in Agua Verde, the man replied, talking to that Mexican woman, the nurse. Victor nodded, seemingly pleased. Good, let her ask questions. Let her think she's the hunter. He turned to address the room of men, his voice carrying. But this time, she's the prey. He reached into his pocket and withdrew half of a broken horseshoe, the talisman he'd carried for 15 years, since the day his father died at Frank's hands. The ghost killed my brother, he told his men. Left him to die in the rain like an animal. For 5 years, I've been tracking her, waiting for the right moment. And now she's come to us. Victor turned back to the fire, holding the broken horseshoe in the flames until it glowed red hot. Then he pressed it against the wooden mantle, burning the symbol into the wood. The ghost thinks she knows vengeance, he said softly. She doesn't, but she will. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust and the promise of violence across the darkened landscape. In Mesa Roja, Martha Reynolds slept fitfully in the doctor's office, her dreams troubled by memories she'd thought long buried. And somewhere between Emma Hayes rode through the night, the twin colts at her hips, a familiar weight, the past and present merging into a single unavoidable moment of reckoning. The prairie ghost had unfinished business, and this time she wouldn't be making the same mistakes. Emma Hayes crouched behind a cluster of rocks, pressing a makeshift bandage against her wounded side. Dawn had given way to full morning, the desert sun already beating down with merciless intensity. She had managed to lose her pursuers during the night, abandoning her stolen horse, and continuing on foot through terrain too rough for mounted men to follow easily. But she had paid a price. The bullet wound, while not immediately life-threatening, had weakened her considerably. Blood loss and exertion had left her lightheaded, her movements sluggish. She needed rest, medical attention, and water, none of which were available in this barren stretch of desert. Emma checked her guns. Both Colts still loaded, though ammunition was running low. She had 6 shots in one, 4 in the other, plus 12 rounds in her belt. Not enough for an extended firefight, but enough to make a stand if necessary. Her thoughts turned to Martha and Rosa. Had they escaped Mesa Roja? Had they reached the safety of her ranch? Or had Blackwell's men caught them? The uncertainty gnawed at her, spurring her to move despite the pain. She had to get back to her ranch, ensure her mother's safety, regroup with Rosa. Then she could plan her next move against Blackwell. Emma pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the lancing pain in her side, and began the long journey home. The desert stretched before her, a vast, indifferent expanse of sand and rock beneath the endless blue sky. She had crossed such terrain countless times during her years as the prairie ghost, tracking fugitives who believed the desert would hide them. Now she was the one being hunted, using every trick she had learned to evade capture. By midday, the heat had become nearly unbearable. Emma's water was gone, her lips cracked and bleeding, her wounded side throbbing with each heartbeat, but she pushed on, driven by determination and fear for her mother's safety. As the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, Emma finally spotted a familiar landmark, a distinctive mesa shaped like a bishop's mitre, which stood about 3 miles from her ranch. The sight gave her renewed energy, and she quickened her pace despite the pain. It was dusk when Emma finally reached the outskirts of her property. Approaching cautiously, she scanned the area for signs of Blackwell's men. The ranch appeared quiet, her house dark. No horses in the corral, no smoke from the chimney. Either the place was empty, or someone was waiting in ambush. Emma circled the property, using the growing shadows for cover. As she neared the barn, she heard voices hushed, urgent. Gripping one of her Colts, she crept closer, straining to hear. "Can't stay here," a woman's voice said, Rosa. "If Blackwell's men tracked her here—" "I'm not leaving without Emma," another voice replied, Martha, her tone brooking no argument. "She'll come here looking for us. And so will Blackwell," a third voice said, a man's voice familiar yet unexpected. "We need to move, now." Emma froze, the voice sending a jolt through her that had nothing to do with her wound. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Moving silently to the barn door, Emma peered through a crack between the weathered boards. Inside, illuminated by a single lantern, stood 3 figures. Rosa, Martha, and a man whose face Emma had seen in her dreams and nightmares for 5 long years. Michael Reeves, Jacob's former partner. The man she had believed dead for nearly 6 years. Emma's hand trembled on her gun. Michael had disappeared a year before Jacob's death, reportedly killed in a shootout with the Cortez brothers, the same outlaws Rosa had mentioned, the ones Emma had tracked down and eliminated. Yet here he was, very much alive, talking urgently to Martha and Rosa. Emma pushed open the barn door, her Colt raised. "Don't move, any of you." All 3 turned, startled. Martha gasped. "Emma, thank God. I said don't move." Amanda repeated, her eyes fixed on Michael. "Especially you." Michael raised his hand slowly. "Emma, I can explain." Explain that you're not dead, that you've been hiding for 6 years while Jacob and I thought we'd lost you. Emma's voice was cold, her gun steady despite her weakness. Or maybe you can explain why you're here now with my mother and a woman you've never met. Emma, please. Martha stepped forward, ignoring the gun. You're hurt. Let us help you. Emma's focus didn't waver from Michael. How are you alive? We found your blood, your badge. The Cortez brothers bragged about killing you. Michael's weathered face showed a mixture of guilt and resignation. It's a long story, Emma, one I should have told years ago. Tell it now, Emma demanded, and make it good, or I'll finish what the Cortez brothers started. Rosa moved toward Emma cautiously. You're bleeding again. At least let me tend to your wound while you talk. Emma hesitated, then nodded, allowing Rosa to approach while keeping her gun trained on Michael. She sank onto a hay bale, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was, how much blood she had lost. As Rosa began cleaning and rebandaging the bullet wound, Michael spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of long-hidden truths. I didn't die in that shootout with the Cortez brothers, he began. I was wounded, yes, but the story was more complicated. I had been working undercover, infiltrating their operation on behalf of the territorial governor. The supposed shootout was staged to extract me after I'd gathered enough evidence. Emma's eyes narrowed. Undercover. You were a bounty hunter like us, not a lawman. I was both, Michael admitted. The governor recruited me specifically because of my bounty hunting background. I could move in circles where regular lawmen couldn't. And you couldn't tell us Jacob was your partner for years before I came along. He trusted you like a brother. Pain flashed across Michael's face. I wanted to tell Jacob, but the assignment was classified. Too many lives at stake, including an informant within the Cortez operation. So you let us believe you were dead, Emma said flatly, for 6 years. After the Cortez operation, I was sent on another assignment, deep cover. I couldn't resurface without risking everything. Emma felt Rosa tying off her fresh bandage, but her attention remained fixed on Michael. What assignment could possibly be important enough to let your best friend think you were dead for 6 years? Michael's gaze didn't waver. The Blackwell brothers. A heavy silence fell over the barn. Martha moved to Emma's side, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. Frank and Victor Blackwell were part of a larger criminal network. Michael continued. The territorial governor wanted it dismantled from the inside. I was placed in their organization, working my way into their confidence. Emma's mind raced, connecting dots she had never seen before. You were with them when we tracked Frank down 5 years ago, when Jacob died. Michael nodded, his face a mask of grief. I was supposed to warn you off. The operation wasn't ready. We didn't have all the players identified yet. But you didn't warn us, Emma said, her voice dangerously quiet. You let us walk into a trap. I tried, Michael insisted. I sent a message to your last known location. It must not have reached you. Emma remembered that rainy day with perfect clarity. No warnings, no messages. Just rain and blood, and a choice that had haunted her for 5 years. Jacob died because of your operation, she said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. He died, and I've been blaming myself all this time. No one was supposed to get hurt, Michael said, his voice breaking, least of all Jacob. Emma's grip tightened on her gun. Tell me everything. Now, no more half-truths. Michael took a deep breath, visibly steeling himself. The Blackwell brothers were the visible face of a larger organization run by someone more powerful, someone with political connections. Frank was violent, unpredictable, a liability. Victor was the smarter one, more controlled. The plan was to let Frank take a fall, promote Victor, and use him to get to the man behind it all. Who? Emma demanded. Michael hesitated. Judge William Garrison. Emma stared in disbelief. Judge Garrison was one of the most respected legal figures in the territory, known for his harsh sentences and anti-corruption stance. That's impossible, she said. Garrison has put more outlaws behind bars than anyone. Yes, the ones who compete with his operation, Michael replied. It's the perfect cover. Nobody suspects the hanging judge of running the very criminal enterprises he publicly condemns. And the revelation was staggering. If true, it meant everything Emma and Jacob had fought for had been manipulated by the very system they trusted to administer justice. And Jacob, how does he fit into this? Michael's expression grew pained. Jacob stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to see, a meeting between Garrison and Victor Blackwell. He didn't know what it meant at the time, but he mentioned it to Reed. Sheriff Reed, Emma interrupted. He was working for Garrison, too. Reed was Garrison's man in Mesa Roja, Michael confirmed. When Jacob mentioned the meeting, Reed reported it to Garrison. That made Jacob a threat. Emma felt sick. So Frank's gang didn't just happen to be in that cabin. They were waiting for us. For Jacob specifically, Michael said quietly, you were collateral damage. Or supposed to be. The truth hit Emma with the force of a physical blow. Jacob hadn't died because she chose to pursue Frank Blackwell instead of staying with him. He had been targeted for elimination from the beginning. Nothing she could have done would have saved him. Why are you here now? Emma asked, her voice hollow. After all this time. Because Victor is off script, Michael replied. After Frank's death, he was supposed to take over, continue the operation. Instead, he's been building his own power base, breaking away from Garrison. The attack on your mother wasn't sanctioned. Victor's gone rogue, pursuing a personal vendetta. Against me, Emma said, for killing Frank. Michael nodded. But there's more to it than that. He hesitated, looking uncomfortable. He's my son. Emma felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her. Your son, from my time undercover with the Cortez brothers. There was a woman, Isabel. She was Frank Blackwell's lover before I arrived then, mine during my assignment. When I was extracted, she returned to Frank. Victor grew up believing Frank's brother was his father. Martha gasped softly. Rosa's face remained impassive, but her eyes reflected surprise. Does Victor know? Emma asked. Michael shook his head. No, Isabel never told him. She died when he was 15. After that, Frank raised him, taught him to hate the law, to trust no one but family. Emma struggled to process this new information. Michael's son, the man who had attacked her mother, who was hunting her now, was the son of Jacob's former partner. So what now? She asked. Victor is coming here. He's figured out who I am, where I live. We need to leave, Rosa interjected. All of us, before Blackwell's men arrive. Michael shook his head. Running won't solve this. Victor won't stop until he gets what he wants. And what does he want? Martha asked, speaking for the first time since the revelations began. Revenge, Michael replied, for Frank's death and legitimacy, recognition. Frank always treated him as lesser, a half-brother. Victor has spent his life trying to prove himself worthy of the Blackwell name. Emma absorbed this, her tactical mind already shifting, evaluating this new information for advantages, weaknesses. We can use that, she said slowly, his need for recognition, for validation. Michael looked at her warily. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time to end this, Emma replied, rising to her feet despite the pain in her side. One way or another. The sun was setting when riders appeared on the horizon, approaching Emma's ranch from the south. Victor Blackwell led a group of 15 men, all armed, all expecting resistance. What they found instead was a single figure sitting on the porch of the small ranch house, Emma Hayes unarmed, a bottle of whiskey on the table beside her, and Victor signaled his men to halt at a distance, studying the scene with suspicion. After a moment, he rode forward alone, stopping about 20 yards from the porch. Mrs. Hayes, he called, or should I say ghost. Emma raised the whiskey in a mocking toast. Mr. Blackwell, you're trespassing on my property. Victor smiled coldly. I don't think you're in a position to complain about trespassing, ma'am. Not with 15 guns pointed at you. True enough, Emma conceded. Then again, I'm not the one sitting on top of 50 pounds of blasting powder. Victor's smile faltered. What? Your men are clustered in a nice tight group, Emma explained conversationally. Right above an old root cellar I've filled with enough explosives to send you all to hell. One signal from me and my friend lights the fuse. Victor glanced around nervously, then back at Emma. You're bluffing. Maybe, Emma agreed, but are you willing to bet 15 lives on it, including your own? A tense silence fell. Victor's men shifted uneasily, some spreading out instinctively. What do you want? Victor finally asked. A conversation, Isona replied. Just you and me. My guns for your word that your men stay put. Victor considered this, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. Agreed. He dismounted and approached the porch as Emma pushed the whiskey bottle towards him. He ignored it. You killed my brother, he said without preamble. Shot him down like a dog. I did, Emma acknowledged. He was a wanted man with a price on his head. It was my job. It was murder. Victor countered, his voice tight with controlled rage. Frank was worth 10 of you. Emma studied him, the scar running from temple to jaw, the cold eyes so like Frank's, yet with a calculation his brother had lacked. There was nothing of Michael in his features, nothing to suggest his true parentage. Your brother died the way he lived, Emma said. Violently, just like my husband died that day. Your husband, Victor repeated, the other bounty hunter. What was his name, Jacob? Jacob Hayes, a better man than Frank Blackwell could ever hope to be. Victor's eyes narrowed. Frank told me about that day, said he had arranged a special welcome for the famous Prairie Ghost and her husband, said you chose the bounty over your dying man. Left him bleeding in the rain while you chased the money. The words cut deep as they were intended to. But Emma had learned the truth now. Jacob had been targeted specifically. Nothing she could have done would have saved him. Frank lied, she said flatly. It wasn't a chance encounter. It was an ambush. Ordered by Judge Garrison, arranged by Sheriff Reed, because my husband saw something he wasn't supposed to see. Victor's expression flickered with surprise. Judge Garrison, what are you talking about? Your brother worked for him. The whole Blackwell operation was just one piece of Garrison's empire. Frank was a pawn, and now you are too. You're lying, Victor said, but doubt had crept into his voice. Frank answered to no one. Everyone answers to someone, Victor, Emma replied. Even Frank, even you. She reached slowly into her pocket, withdrawing a folded paper. Read this. It's a letter from Garrison to Reed dated 3 days before my husband was killed, authorizing the removal of Jacob Hayes due to security concerns. Victor took the paper, cautiously unfolding it to read. His expression darkened as he scanned the contents. Where did you get this? From a man who's been watching you for years, Emma said. A man who knows the truth about who you really are. Before Victor could respond, a voice spoke from the shadows beside the house. Hello, Victor. Michael stepped into view, unarmed, his hands visible. Victor's hand moved to his gun. Who the hell are you? Someone who knew your mother, Michael replied calmly. Isabel Cortez. Victor froze, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. My mother, how did you... Because I loved her once, Michael said. Before Frank took her back. Before you were born. Understanding dawned slowly on Victor's face, followed by disbelief, then rage. No, you're lying. This is a trick. It's no trick, Michael interrupted. Isabel and I were together during my undercover assignment with the Cortez brothers. 9 months later, you were born. Frank knew. He knew you weren't his brother's son. It's why he always kept you at arm's length. Why you were never truly a Blackwell in his eyes. Victor's face contorted with fury. Shut up! His gun came up, pointing at Michael. You're dead, whoever you are. Emma tensed, ready to move, but Michael remained calm. Look at me, Victor, he said quietly. Look at my eyes. Isabel had the same eyes, so do you. Victor's gun hand trembled slightly. His gaze moved between Michael and Emma, anger and confusion warring on his face. If what you're saying is true, he finally said, if Garrison ordered the hit on Hayes, then Frank was just following orders. It wasn't his fault. Frank pulled the trigger, Emma replied. He made his choice just like we all do. But yes, he was acting on Garrison's orders, just as you've been manipulated into coming after me. I'm not being manipulated, Victor insisted. I'm here for justice, for Frank. Are you, Michael asked. Or are you here because you're still trying to prove yourself worthy of a name that was never yours to begin with? Victor's face paled, the gun in his hand wavering. For a moment it seemed he might break. Then his expression hardened resolve, replacing doubt. Enough talk, he said coldly. Ghost, you are coming with me. We'll settle this the way Frank would have wanted. Emma shook her head. No, Victor. It ends here. Now. She nodded toward the distance. Look. Victor turned to see his men surrounded by townsfolk from Mesa Roja, farmers, shopkeepers, ranch hands, all armed, all grim-faced. At their center stood Rosa and Martha, the older woman holding a rifle with practiced ease. Your men are outnumbered, Emma said, and that part about the explosives wasn't a bluff. As if to punctuate her point, Rosa held up a detonator. Victor's face twisted with rage. You think this changes anything? You think I care about those men? They're hired guns, replaceable. And that's the difference between you and a true leader, Michael said quietly. Frank, for all his faults, took care of his own. You're just using them like Garrison used Frank. Like he's using you. Victor's control finally snapped. With a cry of rage, he swung his gun toward Emma, firing wildly. The bullet splintered wood near her head as she dove for cover. Michael lunged at Victor, grappling for the gun. The two men struggled. Victor's youth and strength matched against Michael's experience. The gun went off again, the shot going wild. Then again, and Michael staggered backward, a bloom of red spreading across his shirt. Emma had her own gun now, drawn from a hiding place beneath the porch step. She aimed at Victor but hesitated. This was Michael's son, regardless of how he had been raised, regardless of what he had become. Victor saw her hesitation and laughed bitterly. Can't do it? Ghost lost your nerve. Emma's aim didn't waver. Drop the gun, Victor. It's over. It's not over until one of us is dead, Victor snarled. That's how Frank would have wanted it. Frank is dead, Emma replied, and he doesn't get a vote. Victor's eyes blazed with hatred. But I'm still here, and I vote for blood. He raised his gun, aiming at Emma's heart. The shot that rang out across the ranch didn't come from Victor's gun or from Emma's. It came from behind Victor, from the stern-faced woman standing in the yard with a smoking rifle in her hands. Martha Reynolds watched impassively as Victor fell to his knees, a look of surprise on his face as he touched the blood spreading across his chest. That's for Frank, Martha said coldly, for my daughter, and for me. Victor collapsed face first into the dust, his gun falling from lifeless fingers. Emma stared at her mother in shock. Mom! Martha lowered the rifle, her expression unreadable. No one threatens my family, and it lives to tell about it. Not even a Blackwell. Emma moved to Michael, who was sitting up, pressing a hand to his wounded shoulder. The bullet had gone through missing vital organs. I'll live, he assured her, his eyes on Victor's body, though I'm not sure I deserve to. In the distance, Victor's men were surrendering to the townsfolk, throwing down their weapons. The fight had gone out of them with their leader's death. Emma helped Michael to his feet, supporting him as they walked to where Martha stood over Victor's body. Did you know, Emma asked her mother, about Michael, about all of this? Martha's weathered face showed the weight of long-held secrets. I suspected. There were letters from Michael to your father years ago, before you were born. They mentioned an undercover operation, something big. When Michael disappeared and was reported dead, I wondered. And Frank Blackwell, what was he to you? Martha's eyes grew distant. We were young once, before I met your father. Frank was different then. Or perhaps I just didn't see him clearly. She looked down at Victor's body without remorse. The man he became deserved what he got. So did his brother. Emma absorbed this new piece of the puzzle. Her mother had once loved Frank Blackwell. The man who had taken Jacob from her had been her mother's former lover. The connections between them all ran deeper than she had ever imagined. What now? Rosa asked, joining them. The townsfolk were securing the surviving members of Blackwell's gang, preparing to take them back to Mesa Roja. Now we finish it, Emma said firmly. Garrison is still out there, still pulling strings, still perverting justice. Michael nodded, wincing at the movement. I have evidence against him. Documents, testimonies. Enough to bring him down. Then that's our next move, Emma decided. But first we need to tend to the wounded, bury the dead. As the sun set behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the desert, Emma felt a strange sense of closure. The truth about Jacob's death hadn't brought him back, but it had lifted the crushing weight of guilt she had carried for 5 years. She hadn't failed him. She hadn't chosen the bounty over his life. The choice had never been hers to make. 1 week later, Emma stood before a small, weathered cross marking Jacob's grave on a hill overlooking her ranch. The evening light bathed the landscape in gold, the desert beautiful in its harsh way. She knelt and placed Jacob's pocket watch at the base of the cross, along with his wedding ring and the silver dollar he had always carried for luck. Beside them, she laid her twin Colts, the weapons that had defined her life as the prairie ghost. It's over, Jacob, she said softly. Garrison is in custody awaiting trial. His operation is dismantled. The men who took you from me have paid their price. The breeze whispered through the desert brush, the only response to her words. Emma remained kneeling for a long moment, saying goodbye to both Jacob and to the prairie ghost. Neither could be brought back, nor should they be. It was time to move forward. As she stood, she saw three figures approaching from the ranch house, Martha, Rosa, and Michael, his arms still in a sling. They waited at a respectful distance, giving her this private moment. Emma took one last look at the grave, then turned and walked toward them, toward whatever came next. "Ready?" Martha asked as Emma reached them. Emma nodded. "Ready." They walked together down the hill toward the ranch house where horses were saddled and packed for a journey. Mesa Roja held too many painful memories now. They had decided to make a fresh start elsewhere, all four of them bound together by blood and choice in the shared experience of survival. As they mounted their horses, Emma looked back at the hill where Jacob rested. The setting sun illuminated the lone cross, making it glow like a beacon in the gathering dusk. Beside it, a small green shoot had emerged from the cracked earth, a sign of life in a place long associated with death. Emma turned her horse eastward toward the future, leaving the ghosts of the past to their deserved rest. The prairie ghost had completed her final hunt. Emma Hayes was ready to begin again. On the horizon, the first stars appeared in a deepening sky, ancient and indifferent to human struggles. But on the desert floor, four riders moved forward together, their silhouettes merging with the landscape as they rode into the coming night. Not all wounds were healed, not all questions answered. But for now, it was enough to be moving forward away from shadows and toward whatever light awaited. The desert remembers what men try to forget. It holds the blood, the bullets, the broken promises in its ancient dust. Emma Hayes came to these lands seeking peace, only to find that some ghosts refuse to stay buried, especially the ones we carry within. A mother's love, a husband's memory, a bounty hunter's code. These were the forces that shaped her hand when it reached again for the guns she'd sworn to abandon. The price of vengeance is always steep, measured not just in the bodies left behind, but in the pieces of yourself that don't survive the journey. What Emma found wasn't the justice she sought, but something more complex, truth tangled with lies, enemies bound by blood revenge, twisted into redemption. The broken horseshoe that once marked death now hangs on a weathered cross, a reminder that even in this harsh land, cycles can be broken. As the four riders disappear into the horizon, leaving Mesa Roja and its shadows behind, we're left to wonder, is it the battles we choose that define us, or the moment we choose to lay down our guns? Perhaps the prairie ghost has found her answer in that small green shoot pushing through cracked earth life, emerging from a place long consecrated to death. Some say the desert never changes, but those who listen closely might hear it whisper of second chances.